Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight, and welcome to Writers Speak, featuring the incredible, absurdly talented poet Major Jackson. I appreciate you taking the time out of your evenings to come and get inspired tonight, and I want to remind you that there will be a short Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions for the poet that strike you during the reading, please feel free to use the YouTube chat. I will be there monitoring, and please let us know what you'd like to know, and I'd be happy to relay those questions to Major after the reading. So it's really an honor and a delight to introduce this evening's reader. Major Jackson's poems remind me of the photographs of another famous Pennsylvanian, the surrealist Duane Michaels. Both of their works invite the persistent possibility that the alarm is a ruse and you are still snug in your dream. His verse manifests luscious landscapes. They are tactile, a catalyst for wide thinking. Sometimes somber, sometimes wild, yet undizzied like a whirling dervish, the poems in his latest collection, The Absurd Man, read like cityscapes as rolling hills, reminiscent of our purple mountains, spray-painted chrome, the crests of shoulders aligned in a cherished family photo. I invite comparison in homage to a man who's mastered it. Jackson is the author of 5 collections of poetry, is widely read and anthologized, has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, a Whitting's Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and the Witter Bynner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. In addition to editing poetry for the Harvard Review, he is the Richard A. Dennis Professor of English and University Distinguished Professor at the University of Vermont. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Major Jackson to Writers Speak this evening.
Thank you, Grace. It's such a pleasure to read virtually again for Stony Brook. And I want to thank my friends, all of my friends there, particularly Paul Harding. And Grace, thank you for a wonderful contextualization to my poems. I'm going to read from this book, The Absurd Man, which published this year just before the pandemic. And I would like to read some poems that I've written since then. I'll read probably 5 poems in total. I want to start with The Absurd Man, a poem that ends the book called Double Major. And one of the conceits of the poem is that there's a speaker inside this book that may or may not be my alter ego. There's a poem that opens the book called Major and I, and a poem that closes the book called Double Major. Double Major. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings in ordered Athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry. And thus, I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls our thirst for pads and pencils destiny. Our voices come together like 2 wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability, the test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed, to bed. It used to be a frustrating question when particularly family would ask me, or friends, or family of friends, once they found out I write poetry, they would often ask, well, what is your poems about? And frustrating only because there's so much territory that I feel that my poems address, but I'm now comfortable with saying my poems are about sound, that they attempt to reach a sound and express an individual, unique experience or emotion in that sound. Now that you are here, I can think. What you really are is svelte, the mainland of your feelings, a young Veronica Webb, and what we share are solutions, and not so much the Parisian air you tired of, nor the fat, sweaty bead coursing a décolletage, an unlikely consequence of the Kyoto Protocol, but the pleasures of lounging below French-style windows, open wide as arms, whose blousy curtain is a shawl that formally hangs and informally shifts when you drift into the room like a Spike Lee dolly shot. The kids are dancing to some Ariana, but I'm watching what you do with your lips when reading silently around 4:22 p.m. on a late Sunday afternoon. I have a weakness for marble winding stairs and tight two-person elevators, but the brasseries are waiting, as well as the football fans who need help cheering, for we are Americans after all, and are ready to hype even the locusts on a day of judgment. I don't care about the midfielder or the winger. You're smiling, and that's all the defending I'll ever need. This third poem is called In the 80s, We Did the WAP, and it's one of the poems that I wrote in reaction to protests this summer, thinking about the kind of rise of white supremacy. I particularly was thinking about the march in Charlottesville, Virginia, that led to one of the deaths of the protesters. The title of the poem is In the 80s, We Did the WAP. And you get some text with this one. In the 80s, we did the WAP. If you end your crusades for the great race, then I will end my reenactments of flying. And if you lean down to smell a painted trillium, then I will cast a closer eye on those amber waves. And if you stop killing Black children, then I will turn my drums to the sea and away from your wounded mountains. Who mothered your love of death? Here is a heart-shaped stone to rub when you feel fear rising. Give me anything. An empty can of Pabst, a plastic souvenir, a t-shirt from Daytona. Here is a first edition, the complete poems of Lucille, Clifton. Give me an ancient grove and a conversation by a creek, charms to solve my griefs, something that says, you are human, and I will give you the laughter in my brain and the tranquil eyes of my uncles. Show me your grin in the middle of winter. In the 80s, we did the WAP. You too have your dances. It is like stealing light from a flash in the sky. I promise, no one is blaming you. No one is trying to replace you. It's just that you are carrying a tainted clock, calling it European history. Standing in khakis, eyes frightened, like a mess of beetles. This next poem has me contemplating inheritances, and I have children, and in writing this poem, was thinking about beyond whatever material items I leave behind, whatever financial resources, truly what might be my children's inheritance. My children's inheritance. A fancy for high green hills by a sea, baggy spaces in a day, a knack for gunpowder thinking, a library humming like a swarm of gnats, the intrigue of a woman with a pitch-perfect mind, blinking eyes whose silence is ancient and naked, a grave, which is not a grave, but a ruin to visit in middle age. A chifforobe of half-empty cologne bottles in various colors and dried flowers more dignified in death, both evidence that I once cherished bouquets and timelessness. Bullet casings, a bowl of seashells, fine pens, one the Aurora Diamante with its two-toned rhodium plating that glitters when my right hand rages toward heaven. A love of big plates of pasta, Argentinian folk music, African rainforest, and the speeches of Lincoln that missed the pages of my books more than my doorways. A habit of dancing when the needle drops its existential beats. A disregard for the enemies of linnets and macaws, fears that match the hawk-haunted buttes out west, a hard desire for justice, the habit of lip biting when trouble nears, the way my mouth opens like a flower, my quiver of arrows that outweighs the world, leaving the animals to bear witness. Memories of laughter that was bread and water, stylish hats, ways to time travel, the consequences of mistakes and second thoughts, gummed to the future. A collection of radios, stacks of vinyl, the limitations of secrets, long nights that cascade like waterfalls, my madness, granular and complex, sealed like a footfall. And my last poem is recently published in a journal. I'm very happy to read this poem. It's called Points of Clarification. And though I say here, sorrow beguiles me, I lose no sleep. And though I say here, our country's journey is one long rigmarole, its villages and ridges are succulent and sweet. And though I say here, watch me now, watch me. Truly, I'm shy as stage curtains, demure as tiny cups of espresso. And though I quote Wordsworth, Zagajewski, and Dow, I come from gunshots and beatdowns, raw and dirty. The day was mild, the light was generous. And though I've said in the past, I wear September on my face, which is eternal and does not disappear, I treasure too June mornings soaked in song, July's fevered cauldron, wilting us like seared spinach. And though we say darkness succumbs to the light, I've been reading Faust, questioning the morality of knowledge. Our icebergs and mountains auction, earth collapsing, human flesh for money, crickets barking loud as generals. And though we say, I do unto, I do, death on cue, I'll forever hold her. A jewelry box in my lap, full of prayers and stays against confusion. And though we say world without religions, without revelations, instinct effaced by reason, I swear I can reach up and touch your laughter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Major. That was stunning. Your diction just totally enraptures and makes me want to up my adjective game so much. I'm totally inspired. I invite anyone who has questions to please throw them in the chat. I'll start us off with a couple, and then if you have anything you'd like to ask Major, please put it in the YouTube chat. My first question is, I've heard you talk about creating musicality in your poems, and I'm wondering what your specifically in writing this collection, what were your major musical influences, but also just in general?
It's interesting. This question came from a wonderful poet, Tyler Miller, who asked me about all the allusions in the book, and I had to go through and just kind of, it was fun actually to kind of wave a wand and see what particular writers and thinkers and filmmakers, fiction writers, essayists were informing this book. And it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of jazz and also hip hop, and so much of my listening to a sentence unfolds is owed to kind of the collection of beats that I have accumulated in my body. And so the writing of poems, the writing of sentence becomes a way of maybe paying more attention to that unfolding rather than the actual meaning of the line. So, or the meaning of the utterance. Specific musicians, I cannot point to any, but do know that a number of the poems were written after intense listening, which is a huge part of my process. I listen, I read, I listen, and I read.
That's a beautiful lesson for all of us to take in, especially right now. Be better listeners. I love that. I also wanted to ask you about one of my favorite lines from your collection, Roll Deep, was that when we talk about limits, we disappear, I believe is the line. And I have kind of taken that to mean that we practice a sort of self-erasure when we undervalue the potentiality of our lives. And I'm wondering how you might think that applies to the writing of a poem, just the kind of false limitations that we pressure onto ourselves as poets.
Wow, Grace, thank you. I mean, I'm so gratified that you heard that in that line, because that poem called Disappearing very much has to do with political, social, historical forces that erase us. But I'm also calling attention to how we participate in that erasure. And I think as artists, so much of our writers and musicians, as well as I took a walk in the woods today with several actors. So much of our growth is really owed to a level of confidence that we have in ourselves. And also realizing, I guess, that until we come to appreciate the gift of writing or the gift of singing or acting, truly appreciate that, we might not kind of grow in the way that we need to grow if we're always kind of full of doubt. I'll also say, speaking aesthetically, my experience and my growth has been open to believing that there was no one kind of poem to write, and that it's important in a huge way to be open to the possibilities of language and the possibilities of form, and also for the possibilities of the valence or power of poem or language to kind of interact or create an experience with the reader. So if we put limitations around ourselves, aesthetic, psychic, or otherwise, then yes, we're bound to disappear. But if we allow ourselves to kind of grow and think of ourselves, and this is just in life, period, think of ourselves as learners, lifelong learners, then move towards a greater incarnation of ourselves, both as human beings and as artists.
There's no one kind of poem to write. Right on. I have some questions in the chat here from Ethan.
Sure.
Do you write individual poems in one setting, or do you revisit them over time? Great question.
I love sharing this anecdote, or this, I don't know if it's apocryphal, but the ancient Roman poet Horace said that after writing a poem, you should put it away for 7 years. And after 7 years, you return to it. And if it still has the emotional power or that energy of when you first wrote it, then maybe it was done. I often will revise poems. I have revised poems that have already been published in a book or a journal or newspaper, believing that it's ever evolving. It's ever evolving. And so, which may not be fair, because I'm, a poem that I wrote 10 years ago, I'm bringing a more adult self to bear on that poem. But yeah, that's a good question. I do return to poems. I do believe in revision as an important part of the writing process. And it's hard for me not to revise, in fact. So, yeah.
The poem itself has a growth mindset, much to, as you were just talking in the last question, too. I have another one from May. Do you have a preference between songs with lyrics and songs without lyrics when writing? I imagine lyrics can either distract or inspire depending on the person.
Absolutely. I'm all instrumental when I'm listening. Unless, now that it occurred to me, unless I'm not writing at that moment, but I'm trying to enter into a certain mood or space. There's some music from my youth that is very, very edgy, and it contains words, and it contains words of social critique. A certain kind of critique that's been important in my evolution. And so I was just talking to my wife about this. I stumbled upon, in a movie of all places, kind of like 90s club techno music, which the beats per second in that music will raise your heartbeat really fast. And there have been poems in the past I've written right after listening to that. So it depends. If I'm writing, no words, but if I'm trying to get into a space, then bring on the lyrics.
It's like writing after getting off a roller coaster. It's gonna produce something that's meant about. I'll close it out with on my mind. I'm wondering, who are your pandemic poets during this crazy year of ours? Who are you reading during quarantine and lockdowns? Who would you recommend for all of us?
Yeah, I have been reading a poet by the name of James Wright lately. Also a poet named Eleanor Wilner. I have poets for whom their collections, more than just a single volume, is a great kind of experience. I mentioned one, Lucille Clifton, in one of the poems. I mention these poets because, and I think this is, and I can mention names, but it really depends on who really kind of articulates, not so much what poets give you a certain kind of resilience and belief in humanity, that have you value the earth that you are walking on. And I'm talking about, I was speaking earlier about certain valence of poetry, and for me, this has to do with poets who kind of give us a certain resilience and belief in each other. And I think this is what we kind of need right now, a poetry that is kind of optimistic about the future, that reminds us what is valuable and important beyond our petty affairs. 2020, although a challenge for many people, is a blip in the larger story of humanity, and certain poets help to remind me of that vastness. I mentioned another poet earlier, William Wordsworth, the great English poet of the 19th century, great romantic. All the romantic poets have been really important to me. Pablo Neruda, of all people. I think there's just a great deal of passion there, but I'm also reading poems by younger poets, collections, Nate Marshall and Joshua Bennett and Alexander Hall. Yeah, just so many of the young poets also do that necessary work. I can go on. Rilke, it's just been, poetry has been my lifeline these days.
Yeah, me too. I just want to thank you. I can't thank you enough, Major, for being so generous with your time and your words with us this evening. Thank you so much for being here. And I encourage everyone to go out and get The Absurd Man and to shop small when you do so. And thank you to the Writers Speak, creators of Writers Speak, and to Frank for all of his tech work. So thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you have a great night.